Welcome to Let's Talk Possibility. Tonight we're talking to Dion Jerling of Connect Africa, all about how communication technology is changing rural Africa. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Let's Talk Possibility, where we talk about what's possible when we explore ideas, challenge thinking, and inspire action. I'm Talana Simpson, and with me is my co-host, Chris.
Good evening, everybody.
It's Chris Dykes, and we have Dion Jerling of Connect Africa.
Hiya.
He's with us. He's a special projects director of Connect Africa, which he founded in 2004. And it's an organization that takes communication technology into rural areas and is making a big difference there.
Trying to.
It certainly sounds pretty exciting.
It is. It's great fun.
Dion, maybe just to get started, where do you see the future of communication technology in rural areas, and what is actually happening at the moment?
Well, I think the future's bright, to coin a phrase. The past has not been so great. You know, the rural areas, not so much in South Africa. You tend to find geographically South Africa is pretty well covered. But as soon as you move north, you find that it's lines of rail, large cities, capital cities, main towns are reasonably well connected, but the rural areas have nothing.
Sure.
And that's pretty universal, unless you're talking about small countries. You know, some of the smaller countries, Rwanda, Uganda, are doing very well. But large countries with smaller populations really struggle. It's just not worth the mobile network operators going into these rural areas. And it's usually mobile network operators that start off.
Because of geography, or because of the fact that the people in these rural areas can't afford the technology even if it was there?
Because the networks can't afford it. It's too expensive for them to go in there and put that infrastructure in.
Okay.
Until now.
And this might be a sign of my ignorance, but I thought that there was a number of the bigger cities that are also struggling with that infrastructure and the base for the communication, efficient communication.
I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it's actually quite difficult in some of the heavily built up cities to cover every inch of the city.
Okay.
Secondly, I think everyone underestimated the demand. So you're finding people are putting in transmitters and within they're instantly overloaded.
Yes.
So you might have 3G, but you're actually getting it at sort of dial-up rate sort of levels.
Yeah, I mean, we're experiencing in the middle of Santon at times. 3G networks are certainly chaos at certain parts of the day.
And yet we also take it for granted. I think it's just a natural part of our life, being able to, we all sat down here, opened up our laptops and connected straight away into another world.
Yeah, and went quiet. And then suddenly realized we're supposed to talk.
Stop talking, yes. Right now, everybody, let's...
Broadband, free broadband, fantastic.
But it's such a part of our lives. I mean, it's just something we do, and there's so many opportunities available to us, and yet in rural areas, it's not available.
And imagine if it was, what you could do for the folks. It's huge, but things have changed. That just as you've highlighted, everyone's complaining about not being able to connect, even in the towns. We all take it for granted. The technology developers have recognized that. So you're finding that technology development is starting to find and develop solutions that address those specific problems. And it's taken us 10 years to work in that environment, and we've taken very much a bottom-up approach. We've engaged with the rural people to find out to know and understand what their demand is, what they need, what they want. It's exactly the same as what we want, frankly. It's just on a smaller level. People will spend a disproportionate amount of their income for airtime. Right. For example, it's starting to impact on the basic survival needs, from water, food, security, shelter. You're finding that airtime is starting to impact on food. People will give up a meal to be able to communicate.
And is that because they're wanting to just communicate as in a community, or communicate with very specific purpose? So
purpose.
With business in mind, or links to health, or something?
Exactly that. It's a tool. It's not. In our case, it's entertainment as well as work.
Yeah.
There, it's primarily survival, and communication is seen as a survival tool.
Yeah.
That very quickly, however, evolves into fun.
Yes.
Everybody, of course, sees the benefits of having some fun. Yeah.
And just to go back a little bit, you mentioned sort of these developing areas need. What do you think would be some of the key services that will drive growth in Africa?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of it happening already. Money transfer is a very good example where most Africans don't have bank accounts.
Sure.
And I think the banks have realized they don't actually need bank accounts. What they do need is the ability to transfer money from one person to another. So you had the likes of M-Pesa, which was established by Safaricom in Kenya.
I think Wizit was another example. Is that correct?
Wizit is a South African innovation, but that is cell phone banking as opposed to money transfer. So you actually have a bank account. Okay. It's very effective because it's very cheap and it's efficient. So people can very easily open up a fully fledged bank account to all intents and purposes. That's also the reason why the M-Pesa model failed in South Africa.
Okay.
More people have bank accounts in South Africa.
Okay.
North of South Africa, people don't have bank accounts, and that's why M-Pesa works. But the jury's still out. In Zambia, where we operate primarily, one of the networks, MTN, has established something called mobile money. It's an M-Pesa derivative, basically being able to transfer funds via cell phone. And so far, to date, the response has been absolutely phenomenal.
Wow.
So financial services is a big one. I think education. There's some very.
So I can just ask the question,
sure.
And just to make 100% sure, my understanding of the financial services and a bank account, we're more or less the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and at a very basic level.
Okay.
Insurance companies are starting to get involved in rural areas, particularly for smallholder farmers. You're finding that agriculture, frankly, is the future of most African rural areas.
Okay.
Smallholder farmers are the bedrock of a lot of developing countries.
Okay.
So I was going to say, so the ICT that you've been bringing in now to Africa is the mobile technology and the networks that is allowing people then to use their phone to transfer the money to.
That's right.
To develop their business, to get access to their education.
Our whole sort of remit centres around facilitating the delivery of public and private sector services. So the private sector services would be the banking services, insurance possibly, agriculture, and so on. Your public sector services would be the likes of government, education, health, and then to some degree agricultural services as well. And communication can provide the facility through which these services can be delivered. And it all sounds very grand. We put in what we call a service centre into a rural community, and people imagine an internet cafe or something like that. It's not. It's a guy on a bicycle with a little suitcase.
Wow.
In fact, our first derivative of that was a guy with a rip-off BlackBerry. It was a Chinese sort of derivative of a BlackBerry.
If we look at derivatives in the financial markets, maybe the derivative in a different sense.
In a different sense, yeah. And essentially, he would go around his community writing up messages on behalf of the people in the community, and then he would cycle 20 kilometers to the nearest signal. Wow. And send and receive, and he would get the answers from the previous day and send them back and charge folks a little fee for the delivery.
Wow, I love that.
No different to the telegraph. It was a telegram. It's exactly the same concept. Yeah. So we're not changing the world. We're just sort of kind of making it a little more efficient. And now what we're looking to do is the next level up from there is to provide access for the people without having to travel the 20 kilometers.
Sure.
And that would be a payphone type concept. And then that builds up to coverage across the entire community.
So you mentioned also, just to make 100% sure that I've understood it correctly, the bottom-up approach. I mean, I presume that's working with the rural communities. But can you just give us a bit more detail and maybe a bit more structure behind that?
That's obviously instead of a top-down approach.
Yes.
Yeah, with us, because what I found over the years that we've been doing this, by being in the rural areas, and to be honest, we're in the rural areas because I personally happen to like being there. And what happens is you gain an understanding of what people want and what they like. It's a very, very different environment to the urban areas, but there are very few, if any, technology organizations that have an awareness of what people really want, or more importantly, what they're actually capable of. Networks have not gone into rural areas because it's too expensive. Admittedly, that has been the case until now with the large base stations that they need to set up. They cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then you've got to maintain them. They're very expensive. You've got a village of 5,000 people spending $1 a month on airtime. It's never going to work. Technology costs have come down, but equally, people have become very much more aware of a phone. You'll find at a village where there's no coverage, most people will have at least a SIM card, if not a phone as well, or access to a phone. Everyone also carries all SIM cards for all networks. So that skews the numbers on subscribers that are bandied about.
So people are making a plan to make this work for themselves,
and very aware of how it works. Often better than the networks themselves. The networks are often playing catch up because they're finding a way to sort of work the system. Free calls on a Saturday, and they'll use just that. There was a story on the border between Tanzania and Kenya, for example. An entire small little town, grew up on the Tanzanian side because they could get overflow signal from Safaricom on the Kenyan side. And then of course they did I think they called it flash then, a bit like a call me. But there was a code of rings. 1 ring meant call me back, 2 rings meant I'll call you, or 3 rings come home, give me money. And they never connected the call. So the network was being used, but the call, there was no revenue. So the networks had to drop their prices to entice people to answer the call. So you're finding that Africans can be very, very clever.
Can you, I know that you've done a whole bunch of work in trying to facilitate these communities with technology. Can you give us an idea of some of the projects that you've done or implemented?
Yeah, well, we started in Zambia with satellite payphones. We got into Zambia through one of our partners, Iridium. They do satellite phones, probably one of the best voice networks. And we worked also with a satellite company called Thuraya, who at the time were running what they called an eco rate, which meant that the cost of a call was not much more than your top of the range cellular cost. So we could make it viable. So we introduced a series of about 5 or 6 of these satellite phones into rural areas where there was a good size community. One of the most popular ones, for example, there was a tobacco growing environment. And we found that we guessed that they would probably use about $50 a week in terms of airtime for that. It turned out that it was $250 a day.
Wow.
So and it was a disaster from a service delivery perspective. We couldn't keep up with the demand. But from a research perspective, it was huge. What that led on to very quickly was we shared the results with one of the mobile network operators, and within 3 months there was a tower there.
Wow.
So, where you can identify demand, they will go in, and it's very quick to do the calculation as to whether it's going to be viable or not. It was a pretty obvious place. It was on a main road and everything else. But so that then led us into a relationship with mobile network operators, the cell phone companies, and we have set up our what we call service centers, and they vary from a little kiosk to a guy with a handheld device to a guy with a suitcase to a proper little office which offers and business center, a mini postnet, if you like. And that's where we are at the moment in Western Zambia. We have about 40 of these individuals that are doing these various services, from money transfer through to photocopying, faxing. And that now is evolving into a much bigger project that we're looking at, which centers around agricultural bulk storage for smallholder farmers.
And as you were saying earlier, agriculture being one of the base drivers of economic success going forward.
Absolutely. And what I liked about this one, and this was as a result of a conference actually working, listening to somebody presenting the Agricultural Commodity Exchange for Africa. They're based in Malawi. And a banker giving his presentation immediately afterwards, thinking, well, these two guys are linked.
Yes.
And the banks have an interest in being able to reach the farmer. Obviously, the commodity exchange wants to get the farmer's produce. We should put communication services in that rural area where they have this bulk storage facility and get the bank to pay for it. And the banker actually sort of was open to that, although I never heard from him again.
And basically then move away from barter trade or micro trade into larger scale trade.
Or more worrying is, there's a difference between subsistence farming and smallholder farming.
Yes.
So your barter generally tends to be subsistence, but your smallholder farmers are reliant upon the traders, the passing traders, who will offer them base price at harvest time.
And
so
they probably know
basically
exactly
the
what the story
price.
is either, and they're able to play different people off each other and use sort of
the farmer
market.
gets a rough deal by and large,
right.
But it's worked, and look,
Okay.
at least the farmer has a market, so you can't criticize it. It is doing its job. But if you can introduce the smallholder farmer to the modern commodity marketplace,
right.
And that's perfectly feasible, and that's with utilizing something called warehouse receipts.
Okay.
So your farmer with his 5 sacks of maize can go to a small storage facility. And as long as that maize is of the quality that is tradable,
And how do you ensure that the quality is good?
that again is where what they call it sensitization, teaching the farmers how to
Okay.
grow the produce to
What the minimum
standard
standards
yield.
are, and
Yeah.
and offering,
Again, where communication comes in,
and perhaps using the education, the capacity of the cell phone to facilitate education.
and e-learning materials,
Wow, that's
and
fascinating.
so on. So
Yeah.
it's endless.
So everything combines together with an end goal of ultimately changing the economic system
with a communication
with a
facility,
communication
Yeah.
device, and the towers
And the coverage.
that are set up in areas where there's the demand.
It's a paradigm
and,
shift.
and
yeah.
the economic sustainability.
And what makes it even more exciting is that there's technology coming out now
Okay.
that is cheap enough to justify very low ARPUs, they call it, average revenue per user,
Okay.
of $4 per month per person.
Wow.
It becomes viable to put a signal up to 10 kilometers.
And how many people
width.
to justify
500
that?
people.
So an ARPU of $4 across 500 people
makes it
justifies a
viable.
tower,
Yeah,
which then enables that economic shift.
absolutely.
Wow, that's fascinating.
This is
That's really cool. So we just got a question coming up that says, what are some of the challenges you've experienced in implementing tech in rural, in inverted brackets, uneducated Africa?
that's from Mongezi.
That's from Mongezi.
Okay. I get the feeling that just there is that do the people, because they're uneducated, understand what it is that they want.
Sure.
Interestingly, technology tends to sort of leapfrog education or formal education, as we like. I'm finding one of the most fascinating things I saw was an old man, sending a text message, totally
Yeah.
literate, has never
Yes.
been to school in his life, but
Yes.
he's sending an SMS.
Wow.
And what had happened was that his nephew had put in a series of messages on his phone,
Wow.
numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and he knew that number
Okay.
1 meant I'm hungry, number 5 meant I need some money, number
Yeah.
4 meant I come home,
Yes.
and he was able to send SMSs. So people get around it.
Oh, that's
They
fabulous.
understand it 100%.
Okay.
So the challenges that we face really have centered around educating the developed crowd
Yes.
that there is some merit in
Yes.
going into the rural areas.
And
That's
Okay.
been the biggest challenge.
And that's the bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
For you guys being at grassroots, understanding what the needs are and what the opportunities are, and then going back to the providers to say, this is what can be
Exactly
done.
that. And it's an interesting scenario because equally it does give us a bit of an edge. So we don't want to say too much about it because we, of course, want to implement it and capitalize on that. Sustainability is the big thing. So we need to be profitable in order to make it work. And that's something I've learned over the years, is that sustainability is everything. If you're
Sure.
going to introduce a service, people have been introducing internet cafes, service centers, these containers with the most amazing kit inside into rural areas, and they've not worked. They work whilst they're being funded.
Absolutely.
As soon as the funding dries up,
It's not
they dry
sustainable.
up. It's unfortunate. Sustainability is the challenge.
Yeah. And if anything, it perpetuates other issues around entitlement and whatever else, or other social issues and cultural issues, because it doesn't create the economic infrastructure.
Absolutely. And the way to get around that really is, again, people know precisely what it is they need. And free doesn't work. People will pay for something if it's worthwhile.
You're saying
Yeah.
they would miss a meal to get there.
Absolutely.
Their aid.
And there's a sense of value that's then introduced, which means that people will start looking after whatever it is that you're providing.
Sure.
So that really works. You know, if you come into a village and you say, we're going to put a cyber cafe here, may we? Well, you know, of course
Guys
they're
are
not
gonna
going to say
yeah.
no.
Cool. Bring it on.
Absolutely. So you really want
We'll even watch you do it. We'll even watch you install it.
but if you say, I'm going to bring that same cyber cafe and I'm going to charge you $10,000, they're going to
Yeah.
say, well, no thanks.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to find the balance. You need to come in and say, well, it's going to be a guy with a suitcase. It's going to cost you $1.
Yes.
And then it builds up from there. And that's
Okay.
that's the secret.
Cool. Just another question that's come in is from, looks like Steve or Sue Steve, asking sort of red tape with a question mark.
Horrendous. We've bashed our heads
so
against.
How did you make this happen?
Went commercial.
Okay. Which means?
Which basically meant if you run it as a pure development organization, sourcing the development funding is a very long process and can be frustrating. It has helped us tremendously. In its defense, without the development funding that we got from various partners, we would never have got to where we are today.
So using development funding to get off the ground, but then using a viability profitability model that ensures that you're able to continue without doing exactly what the container issue is doing.
And that's exactly what's happened. And I would never have guessed that when I started off.
Yeah.
Never. You imagine you're either going to be an NGO or you're going to be a cell phone network.
Absolutely.
The fact that you can work with the two, and it's very interesting to see how the development organizations have evolved over the last 5 years and changed, where development funding is available for commercial enterprises, because they will rather give money to somebody who is accountable to shareholders and somebody who is going to force them to be sustainable, or can prove that they're a sustainable operation, versus a charity or something that is not sustainable and purely dependent. We also sit in a crossover. Technology is a business, and you can't provide technology sort of for free.
Yes.
It's got to develop in perpetuity. So, and that only comes with revenue and development funding from within.
Okay.
So that's what's it's very, very interesting to see how it's evolved.
Okay.
So on the financial side of it, there's one way to make it more sustainable. But I know also one of the underpinnings of Connect Africa is your partnerships and cooperation with other organizations. Is that how you're making it more sustainable?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I think one of our strengths is the fact that I keep using the word facilitate, and I mean that in its purest form. We will introduce various parties to an area, a community, or a solution.
And that's given your knowledge from being on the ground and having this bottom-up approach.
Absolutely. And then when people know that you have access to a rural community, it's remarkable how many people actually would like to reach that community.
Yeah.
Genuinely so. People, banks want to lend money.
Right.
They also, want to make a difference, but they also want new customers. So there's a nice sort of interaction there. Cell phone companies.
Sure.
That's the only new market available to them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in Johannesburg, you look at Vodacom and MTN fighting it out for market share.
Yeah, now they're trying to pinch one another's customers.
Absolutely. So
not realizing, of course, they've got each other's customers anyway.
Yes.
So some of the things that are coming up, I think you've got some really, really exciting projects. I know there's one where you've got some new cutting-edge GSM infrastructure. And you kind of touched on that briefly, but that's going now forward. Yes,
like we were talking a second ago, that we're working with an American technology company that has developed a transmitter that is the size of a biscuit tin, and it sits on the top of literally a flagpole.
That's the one we...
Yeah.
Because the other thing was the alternative energy source, because obviously people need to charge their phone in order to use it.
Yeah, this is also where it gets very exciting. At the moment, it's a huge challenge. Power is the driving force, literally and figuratively, behind coverage. Without power, it doesn't work. Currently, these big towers are powered by generators if they're not connected to the grid.
Sure.
So there's a huge cost involved with that.
To the generators or diesel or whatever
Getting
fuel
the diesel.
it is. Yeah.
In DRC, I understand some of the networks are shutting down towers because they literally cannot get the diesel there in time, and they can't stockpile it. Yeah, so they have to do it last minute.
Okay.
And it's just physically not possible in jungles and so on. It's very difficult. So everyone is looking for another solution, not necessarily alternative. Any other solution will do. The alternative energy market is working hard, but it's not quite there yet.
I would have thought solar power would be the automatic option.
Solar sadly is not quite there. It's much better than it was, but it's still very, very expensive, and it's not very efficient. In order to power up one of these towers, you'll need football field size of solar panels.
And I'm guessing that it'd also be quite a nice incentive to have one of these solar panels on the top of my house getting some hot water going.
Or even worse, apparently they're very popular as coffee tables in some villages.
Great design.
Yeah, indeed. Very pretty. It's a problem, yeah.
Okay.
And it's one that we face, interestingly.
Yeah.
We're putting in these lightweight towers, of course, and
the biscuit tin towers that you were referring to earlier.
Indeed, and they are powered by a solar panel with a small battery, both of which are eminently desirable.
Yes.
So we get round that by putting them into a chief's compound or onto a school, a police station, a clinic.
Yeah.
But most importantly, you find if the community become very aware of the importance of that facility, and if it were to go down because somebody has nicked a bit of it,
absolutely,
you only have to go to the traditional leadership, and it's minutes, if not at most an hour, it'll be back there. so generally, self security works.
And that's where community participation and your bottom up approach really starts to come to the fore, because your relationship defines the value add.
Indeed. And it's one of the great things about rural areas by comparison to urban areas.
Or even semi-urban for that matter, where the relationships have already been compromised.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more anonymity.
Yeah, indeed. And what's also interesting about this technology is it works in the urban areas too as fillers.
Okay.
You do have dead spots, like you were talking about some parts of Santon where the coverage is not very good. It can be put there, bolted onto the side of a building. So again, the security relating to that building will look after the unit, as opposed to having to hire a security company to guard it or alarm it and the costs associated with that.
So is there a role, or rather what would the role be for somebody with a cell phone, or a corporate that wants to get involved, or somebody that sees an opportunity, maybe an NGO who has relationships with communities? Is there that opportunity, or rather, how could we take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, there's endless opportunities. A small example is we're working with a health organization in Zambia who are setting up a series of clinics across the entire country.
Yes.
They've seen the benefits of communication, and particularly access to data. And in a clinic, it's quite useful when they can talk to doctors and nurses remotely.
Yes. Yeah.
But they don't have coverage. Okay. So we now have a location where we can install the equipment, and it's safe. A basic need.
Yes.
And they in turn get the connectivity, pay for it, which is good for us and for the community, and the whole thing becomes a triple win.
And that bottom-up approach has already been perpetuated to some extent, given the personal relationships that exist with the health providers and the individual people.
Indeed, and we can go in with our knowledge of the sort of rural areas, but have the benefit of immediate links that have already been established.
Yes, and
so it's
a degree of trust.
Huge, absolutely imperative.
Okay.
So maybe we can just end off now. We got one more question from Mongezi. He was asking about, do you have any interesting examples of an SME or something that has grown because of your initiatives? I know there was one about the lady running a farm.
Yes, Mary.
We were talking about earlier, yes.
Yeah, outside of Mumbwa, which is a small town about 2 hours west of Lusaka, who runs a small holding. And there were two things for her really. One is the produce that she generated was being sold at the local market in Mumbwa at whatever price she could get, and she would only know what that was going to be when she got to town. Secondly, she was growing the same stuff time and time again. We then introduced a community.
Just on that note, if she came to the town and either the market was too low or the market price was too low, or if she had too much stock for that market to take, then there's all kinds of logistics issues of either getting it back.
She'd have to sell it for whatever she could get.
Dirt cheap, or perhaps even given away.
Indeed.
Otherwise, it would just literally go off anyway.
Yep.
So,
now, of course, she has access with the community phone to be able to determine what the market price is before she goes in, so she's not going to get ripped off by the buyers. But you can also find out what the demand is.
Yes.
She can also access information as to what other farmers are doing, and if everybody's growing maize, well, maybe I should think about growing beans or some other product that will give me a better price at harvest time. A very simple example.
Yeah.
Another fun one really is we've partnered with one of our local employees who has a small farm, and created a sort of a permaculture type environment for that. A lodge that we were working with on an education and coverage basis showed some interest, and they like the idea of permaculture, organic and the like. And their problem is they have to go to Lusaka to source their vegetables. Right. So we found out what vegetables they needed, and then we started planting some of those in Kutenda Farm, it's called, and successfully so. But we had to go to the lodge, which was 200-300 kilometers away, or use their internet link via satellite, which is very expensive. This kind of communication is completely out of the realms of a smallholder farmer.
Yes.
Subsequently, one of the networks has put a tower up next to that lodge. That lodge is now connected. Now the farmer on the farm can talk to the kitchen manager and decide on that day what he needs.
Oh, that's great.
And that has just changed the market for them, 100%. It's phenomenal.
Wow.
And I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
If I can just ask one other last question.
One more.
I always drag things on a little bit, so apologies everybody. So many examples in South Africa exist where a community has been assisted with a permaculture infrastructure or some kind of other base to start growing vegetables. And in so many instances, within 6 months, that infrastructure has either been sold in the short term or neglected, or there just hasn't been enough of a work ethic to make a success out of the infrastructure. Are you experiencing a different culture or a different vibe or a different approach to work? And what would you think? If so, what would be the basis behind that?
Money. Yeah. Everybody is in the rural areas. It's survival, and people are growing whatever it is they can to make whatever money they can in order to survive. Once they have access to information and money, you suddenly find that they can be more selective and they can be cleverer about it.
But assuming that the same situation exists in South Africa, where you've got the same need for money and the same need for survival, that surely would then represent a similar starting point.
It's always confused me as to why South Africa doesn't have it all, because it's got the resources, it's got the environment, it has everything there, and yet it doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah, we're just not seeing the kind of growth that we would anticipate or certainly hope for.
No, indeed. With what the country has got, it should be, particularly in the rural areas, a lot further than where it is.
And possibly, maybe as a real positive outcome for today, it's about saying, through technology, how do we find those farmers that are genuinely committed and interested and dedicated to making their either subsistence or small holding or even a greater, I can't remember the word that you're using, and use the infrastructure to work with those individuals as opposed to just randomly finding communities and saying,
to give them a different paradigm of doing business.
Absolutely.
Give them access to information and markets, and what's going to do that? Communication.
Absolutely. And if we've got the base up front through the communication, then it creates a real strong foundation.
Absolutely.
Great. So if you want to hear more, you can get in touch with Dion Jerling, our guest, through the website, connectafrica.net.
Yep.
Probably the best way. And let's keep talking about this. You can send us your questions and comments on our Facebook page or tweet us on LTP. I always say it wrong. Tweet us on LT Possibility. And
Good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Dion,
Thanks very much.
Cool.
Cheers.